Fatal.
Wow.
Yeah, fatal.
Number one cause of death.
Yeah, rushing through reading. Hello, and welcome back to the 7 Stage LSAT podcast. We are pleased to be here back with you today. At the end of this episode, I've recorded another segment with JY, so stay tuned for that.
That's a big get for the podcast.
It's a big get, and it's only just the beginning. We're going to have much more of that, so hope to feature him a lot. But first, Henry and I are going to discuss reading comprehension. That's exciting. What were your feelings about reading comprehension when you were a student?
To be honest, I didn't really like it.
No.
Honesty, unfettered honesty, no filter. Mm-hmm. This is the no filter podcast.
Yes.
LSAT without filters is the new name of the podcast. And in truth, when I was studying, I was like, let me just get 100% in LR, 100% in LG, and like let's have the chips fall where they may in RC. And it's true. That is actually the truth. But that was my God. That being said, I was already I was in decent shape with RC.
Yeah. I a lot of times people will ask like, oh, what's your favorite section? And especially now that it's just two, I'm like, no one says RC. There's no one who says RC. So it's listen, there's a reason why it's been requested. And so, we'll give you a few tricks that hopefully make RC easier. I think we got to start with the most important thing to increase your RC score is to improve your reading process, right? The cake is made in the read through. I had some analogy. Okay, let's stick with me. All right. See, I'm going to get to the analogy in a sec. The thing is, like, the reading is where you compile the ingredients, right? You can't like skip that phase. You can't skip to, you can't skip phases when you're. Boy, this is going off the rails.
Can you make a cake without eggs?
No,
or flour.
You can't. Or flour. No, it is a necessary component and the reading to me is the most important part. So a lot of times if you're struggling with reading comprehension, you are really struggling with the reading. And yet a lot of people will focus their energy and their time when they're actually taking the test on the questions themselves.
God.
Henry, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of great resources for LR, and then RC is a little bit harder to focus on because there's so much there's so many different types of problems you might have, right, when it comes to RC. But I think you're right when we say that most people's problem is probably downstream of the ability to comprehend the passage itself, rather than some sort of weird formula or approach. I know there's a lot of like weird tricks that people posit or propose that you can do in art, like, read the first and last sentence of every paragraph and then read all the questions first. I mean, I honestly just think that's a lot of BS. Like really, nothing can replace a good understanding of the passage. If there was some trick that just universally worked, then it would be called the read the questions first and see what's relevant, test section. So it's called reading comprehension because you really need to force yourself to sit down and try to understand what the passage is saying. And it's scary though, too, because you don't get any points for understanding the paragraph or understanding the passage. You could have a perfect understanding of all four passages, but if you don't answer the questions, you're getting a 0. And so it feels wrong. But again, right, upstream of you answering these questions right is how well you've comprehended the passage to begin with. And so I agree that passage comprehension is really where you want to begin. Right? Don't think about any weird fun tricks or tips that you can use. If they work, it's like accidental.
Here's a tip. Don't read the questions first. Listen, there's very few things that and you honestly, I don't know where people get that from. I know that it's a thing on other standardized tests. I know that like on easier reading comprehension, it's something that will help you. It really will not help you at all. I mean, if you look at because if you're taking the SAT, at least the last time I looked at it, which was a long time ago. But I used to tutor it, right? And so like the questions can clue you into like what to pay attention to. I mean, on the LSAT, the questions are like things that they don't like, they're not about subject matter. It's just about like, you know, author's intent. Like it's things that like you should be paying attention to no matter what. It's not giving you any magic insight into the passage. It's like, what's the main point? Oh, I guess I should be reading this for the main point.
Yeah.
Like, what is the,
Wow.
you know, like inference? Like, it doesn't help you. It just wastes your time to read questions first. And time is such a precious commodity, especially on RC.
Yeah, and maybe we can use that as a segment into maybe some strategies. And I think a lot of this stems from, even if you did read the questions, and even if the questions maybe informed you where to look, I think a huge issue that you can run into is it's really difficult to read and think at the same time. And so if you're reading and you're trying to keep track of 8 different questions where you're like, okay, I got to make sure, they mentioned this person, Alderson, and then I'm reading for when Alderson comes up, and then you're not actually reading the sentences. You're not understanding what the sentences say. That's a huge issue. And so you want to make sure that as you read, you're not just reading, right? You're comprehending. And usually what that means is taking breaks, right? Taking breaks or pausing to actually think about what you just read. Does that sound kind of aligned with your recommendations,
Absolutely.
Alex?
Yeah. I mean, and the macro tip I would give is slow down your reading for most people. Most people, you need to move slower, which is so counterintuitive because you are probably running out of time. Most people are. Most people do not have enough time to do this, but I would guess this is not true for everyone. This is not true for everyone. So self-reflection will help here. You're reading too fast. You're probably sinking a lot of time on the questions. We'll get to that in a sec, but I think the reading process, you want to stop frequently and assess what you've just read. You want to stop frequently and rehash, paraphrase what you just read. Do it not just at the period breaks, but I think I said this in a video that we're releasing soon, but like the second things get weird in a sentence, the second things get a little confusing, I'm going to stop and just reiterate what I just read because they're packing so many ideas into a very small, real estate.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's really true. And a good thing that you can do to force yourself, and this is something that I do kind of just naturally when I'm reading a question in LR or I'm reading a passage is I get to the period and I say, okay, so, and then I paraphrase the sentence. So they might give a very or somewhat convoluted sentence, and maybe it's not even that convoluted. Like it feels like I understand it, but I just pause and say, okay, so X, Y, and Z. Right. So, Professor Alderson, Professor Johnson, and Professor Jacobson are looking into the mitochondria and they've discovered it's the powerhouse of the cell. Okay, so there's some professors, they're looking into cells and they figured out like what's energizing it. All right, then you keep on going. I think that's a good way to force yourself to slow down. Additionally, too, just in terms of like raw reading, you do want to make sure that you are covering every word. It's really easy not to, especially in today's day and age where you and we read content and we read for speed and we skip over some words because we're uninterested. So forcing yourself to go at a read aloud pace, right? Imagine you're reading it aloud in your head is another way to force yourself to slow down and make sure you're not just skipping a sentence or 5 words, because I mean, those 5 words could be very important. And you would only know if you actually end up, seeing them, I guess.
Yeah.
Seeing.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think the first step is it really falls into the category of, sometimes you hear it called translation. You translate these really, the LSAT's so dense, it can oftentimes feel like a foreign language and you want to translate it into your own words, paraphrasing, whatever you want to call it. Like that is a key to me. I think of it also as like being in dialogue with the text. Like an exercise that I would have students do is like literally write on the side, like write out what is it that you're thinking as you are reading, because it's so easy to just get in like fight or flight mode, panic mode. You're just trying to latch on to different words and you're looking at the clock, like, and you're not doing the thing that you need to do, which is to slow down and to be in true dialogue with the things that you're reading. The other thing I would say is oftentimes like order of information in an RC passage is presented in a strange way. Like they strip out the context a lot of times. And I've actually looked at all RC passages are taken from existing writing, and I've compared at like in a few places an RC passage with the thing that it was taken from, and you can see the cuts they've made. There's one example where it's like it's the topic paragraph, and it's like, this plan is important for for a myriad of reasons, and then the next paragraph goes, first blah blah blah, and then it goes through it, and then the next paragraph it goes like secondly or additionally, like, here's the reason why, and they're connecting it back to that first point. But on the LSAT passage, they've cut the first sentence, they've cut the intro sentence of that paragraph, so they're not connecting this paragraph back to but they're tearing out that connective tissue. They're not making connections for you. So it's your job to push back against that, to, with every new piece of information, link it back to what's come before. The LSAT will not give you context to begin with. It will often give it later. So if you have a question about something you're reading, don't ignore that question. A lot of times people try to sort of fake it. I feel like I should understand this, so I'm just going to gloss over it, pretend I understand it, and move on. No, identify the question, because chances are, like, you have a question for a good reason, and there's a good chance that question will be answered. But if you just gloss over it and don't identify the weird thing you've just read, the questions that you have about the text, then you won't be able to answer that question once you find the relevant information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the additional thing I would add, though, too, is if you have that question, pause to think about, like, based on the passage, what would the answer maybe be? Or what would make sense as an answer? A lot of these passages are set up in such a way where if you have a question, based on the prior information they've given you, even though they haven't spelled it out for you, you can kind of make an inference about what's coming down the line. Or maybe you just misread something and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that's actually here. I do have the answer to that question. So just pausing while you're reading to, again, think about the passage is I think, very useful. All right. Yeah,
absolutely. But yeah, the reading portion of is by far, I think, that's the most important part of this, which is not, I don't know. It's weird to say the most important part, because it's like, well, it's all important, but I think people just devalue the period of time that's spent reading the actual passage, because it's not, ostensibly it's not what you are graded on. No one's like scoring your actual read through. They assess that based on the questions. Don't make the mistake of rushing through the reading. It's a fatal mistake. It's going to sink. It's fatal.
Wow.
Yeah. Fatal.
Number one cause of death.
Yeah. Rushing through reading.
Reading. Yeah. But I guess just to speak on if we wanted to give, I would say, like, 4 minutes is a good timeline. Like 4 minutes is a good, it's a ceiling that you can kind of think of yourself at, where it's like, hey, look, I don't understand something. I've read the end of the passage and I've had, I did it in 2.5 minutes. Okay, reread then. Reread elements. Use that next minute and a half before you move to the questions to solidify your understanding. Of course, that doesn't mean if you feel like you have a full understanding of the passage after 2 minutes or 3 minutes, you should wait that extra minute. Go ahead and keep going. But ask yourself, do I really understand what I just read? And you want to be honest with yourself. Get honest, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Get honest.
Why not?
Important.
Honesty. Is it the best policy?
It is. I think so.
In some instances,
it's one of the best. Yeah. I would say the other thing is, like, hey, take longer when you start. Like, don't like, if 4 minutes sounds quick, like, it is quick, right? And so maybe it's like, wait, you're telling me to slow down and still read this question in 4 minutes? Like, that's not a lot of time. Yeah, listen, if that isn't slow for you at first, then take more time. Do this slower. It is the number one tip I think I could give, or one of the top tips that I could give for the LSAT writ large, is, like, do not be afraid to start slow. Like, do not rush this process. Go untimed.
Be not afraid.
Be not afraid. And then it will get in your bones, right? And you can speed it up. So the other thing I would say is, don't be afraid to do this on pencil or pen and paper. I give that advice sometimes because, listen, I don't know why they took away the option to just do this on pen and paper. You used to be able to just choose to do it that way or on the computer. Or actually, I do know why. It's because it's more expensive and more of a hassle for them to grade, I'm sure. but a lot of people read better, like when they're able to underline, when they're able to mark it up. And so I would say, like, if you're that type of person, do that at first. Like, don't do that when you're taking PTs. Don't do that. Phase that out as you move along in your studies. But like, do not be afraid to give yourself training wheels at first. Like it is helpful. It is the best way to approach these really difficult topics. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, training wheels, I use those to learn to ride. I will say, if you are going to read, now that I can give my hot tip, because this was something that I do, and I guess some people don't do it, but I would, yeah. I just cast it out into the ether. When you're reading online, take your mouse, put it on the word you're reading, and move it as you're reading. Just to help you figure out where you are in the passage. It really helps.
I would say that for me, like, yeah, that would have been really helpful. I think that I read much better when I'm able to underline. And obviously you can't do that on the when you're taking it on the computer. Just so people know, you can get an accommodation to take it on paper and pencil. So that is still an option. It just used to be your choice, and now you need doctor or medical professionals. You need to go through the accommodations process. But that is an option if you have like a real need and compelling reason for that, then definitely look into it. I will say, reading on the computer, I read much better underlining because it's like tactile, because there's like motion involved. And I do think, Henry, what you're talking about is bringing that in. It's just like a secondary task that makes sure you're, keeping that you're tracking what you're reading. And so you've said, like, people have really responded to that suggestion.
A couple people. I mean, yeah. So yeah, people, countless.
Yeah. Well, you can't count them. You're not sure. So it's countless.
Yeah, I guess that is fair. Yeah. So I guess we should move. Let's actually move to the questions now.
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, I was thinking about your cake baking analogy, and I kind of really liked it, because think about, like, how much, what's in a cake? Flour, eggs.
Mm-hmm. Usually.
What else?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What else?
Butter.
What else?
Some sort of flavoring. Vanilla, oftentimes. Chocolate, sugar.
Yeah. How long would it take you to eat those ingredients raw?
That's a good question. I don't know. Probably not that long, I guess.
No, that's the wrong answer. A long time.
The direction. Okay, a long time. Sorry.
But after you baked the cake, how long would it take you to eat those ingredients?
Not very much time.
At least not as much time. And that's the same idea behind the questions, where if you understand the passage, perhaps the questions will go by pretty. Actually, I think you'll be surprised. Like, I think a lot of these questions in RC, you can answer them in like 15 seconds. A lot of them.
Yes. People spend way too much time on the questions. They spend way too much time looking for 100% certainty on these questions, and not enough time on the reading. That's what I would say.
Yeah. You spend enough time in the reading, and then you just let the vibes take over for the most part.
Yes. It's all vibes from there.
It really is, though. I think the way I like to move through the questions is I look at the answer choice. I ask myself, do I think this looks good? If the answer is affirmative, it does look pretty good, and it looks good 90%, I'm picking it and moving. If it looks good, like, I don't know, 60% good, maybe I take a quick glance at the other answers. And I mean a glance. Like, I'm not really deeply considering, unless there's two things that look equal. And then I'm like, okay, maybe I'll deeply consider. But if I look at the first question, and it's like, I don't think this looks that great, I don't really remember this, don't try to figure out if it's wrong. Keep on going.
Right. Just keep going.
Yeah. RC more so than LR, I think, is about which of these looks the best without having a positive reason why the answer choices are wrong. Whereas I think in LR, a lot of times you can go through the questions, be like, this is definitely wrong, this is definitely wrong, this is definitely wrong, this is definitely wrong. Okay, so this one's right. Where RC is a little bit more of this feels okay, and the other ones, I just didn't feel anything. And so I'm going to pick that.
Totally. Yeah. The other things I'll say, in terms, just to loop back to reading for 1 sec.
I thought we moved on. I thought we moved on. Damn it.
We can't. We got to return, because I realized we didn't plug our two, like, some of the things that we teach, which are passage types, which we're not going to go through those on the podcast, but a very useful, like, rubric for how to categorize certain types of passages, the questions you want to ask yourself as you read. So definitely like take advantage of that. It's all in the core curriculum on 7Sage. It just having a system for this test, no matter like, is so useful. And there's so many different systems, and that's just a great one where you start to recognize the hallmarks of certain passage types. You know which questions to ask yourself. It's going to make that reading part easier and more process based. And the other thing is low res summaries, right? Which again, you consult the core curriculum there on 7Sage, but it encourages you to read for not just reading for content, but also for structure, having an eye for what is the author's intent here, what is the overall purpose of this paragraph or sub paragraph within the passage. Those are really, really key. So 2 strategies there that I would encourage everyone to take advantage of. But returning again to the questions, yeah, I mean, it all comes down to being okay with getting it wrong or accepting that you could, right? Really understanding that your job is to go with the one you're most confident in, not to get it right.
Yeah, it's true. RC is just naturally, there's going to be a lot more variation. I think in RC, it's hard to know. Where in LR, you can be sure that almost every word that you read will have some amount of relevance to either the stimulus or to whether or not the answer is right or wrong. In RC, there's a lot of words that are just like sentences that are just kind of redundant, and you could subtract the sentence and it almost wouldn't matter. And so I think that the band of variation is going to be higher, and because it's going to be higher, again, as you said, it's okay to get questions wrong. You're looking for the thing that's going to net you the most questions. You're not looking for perfection.
Yeah. It's also, I don't know that I'd say redundant, because I do think there is really new information in every sentence, but
it's true. But yeah.
But it's hard to know what's going to be important and what isn't. So you can't really skip around. Like there are sentences that at the end of the day, after you've finished all the questions, there are probably sentences that you could just remove and be like, that didn't matter at all in terms of what I needed to know. The problem is you have no idea. There's no way to know that. And even if you were to read, just to return to one myth, to bust a myth, is like, the questions aren't going to clue you into that either. It'll often be the answers. Like the correct answer will be utilizing this piece of information instead of that piece of information. So there will be sentences that are ultimately extraneous. There's just no way to know what they are as you read.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and again, it's kind of like coming back to this idea that because there's so much more material, it's just going to be way harder for you to be very consistent in it. Also, the question stems in RC have a lot more variation. I mean, there's some very stereotypical ones like main point, author's perspective, but because the passages are not so different, but a little bit more different than the average like question. Sufficient assumption is from the other sufficient assumption questions, and it's just going to be really hard to be consistently incredible or to have a consistent -0 or -1. Which is why, of course, you should probably spend a little bit more of your time studying LR. So what I would say, hey,
well, and now there's two. Yeah, there's more. It accounts for more of your score.
Yeah, double portion.
Mm-hmm.
Dinner is served.
Dinner is served. Bon appetit.
Cake is served.
I think just one of the major difficulties, I don't think this will come as a surprise to anyone, is just the clock. Like, I think if you had unlimited time, RC would not be very hard. It would be boring. It would be a pain, but like you would be able to figure out every answer if you understood the passage, if you understood the words you were reading, right?
Yeah. Sure.
You don't have enough time, right? So you have to learn to read for certain things, to read in a certain way, so that you can give yourself the best shot at answering these questions correctly in the time allotted. I don't know if that resonates with you.
Oh yeah, that definitely resonates. I mean, I guess some things to read for are differing perspectives, like having buckets of different perspectives.
Absolutely.
And you'll get a better sense of like what qualifies as like a notable perspective as you just practice a little bit more and as you read enough of these passages. Like sometimes a person, someone will say something, but it won't really rise to like being essential to understand the meat of the passage. And you'll know to maybe, I don't say ignore that, but you'll say like, I don't need to memorize this too deeply, or I don't need to like put too much power, brain power towards that. But yeah, I mean, you could read the passage for every single answer choice, and I'm sure you'd get 100%. It would take a while, and as I said, it'd be boring. You just can't do that. I don't know. Do you have any rants about RC? Do you have any little rants?
Don't read the questions first. To me, that's just like a no-brainer.
That's
Whenever
silly.
someone brings that in, which is not common, it's not that all that often, I'm just like, oof, no. There's very little on this test that I won't entertain. Like, I think that there's no strategy. Most strategies are not like, I'm like, yeah, if it works for you, it works for you. Like, here's why I think this one in general works for more people than other people. But, with like reading the question stem first, like, I think it works better for me. I think it works better for most people. But like, I know there are a lot of people who would rather read the stimulus first, and that's fine. I think that's great. I think that this test is about figuring that out for yourself. And anyone who tells you that there's only one way or the highway for something like that is like, that's just disingenuous, right?
No secrets to the LSAT.
Right. But this is the one thing where I'm like, no, this has no utility. You should not read the questions in RC first.
Makes no sense.
Yeah. When I say read the questions stem first, when I said that before, I was referring to an LR where it's,
different question or different type of passage, or oh my god, section is a different type of section. So I need this kiwi strawberry Celsius to hit a little bit harder.
Common fixture on the podcast is talking about Celsius. It comes.
Is that
up.
true? Yeah.
How are you sleeping these days?
Not well, but
not well.
That's why we drink the Celsius, right?
Yeah, it's a vicious circle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think. I don't know. Who knows? All right. Well, I think that's good. I think there's a lot of wisdom there. Little
nuggets.
But stick with it. It really is something that takes a lot of time and takes repetition. I think the gains are more incremental with RC than with LR. So, it can be frustrating, but don't get discouraged because there is real improvement that will come. I just do believe for the most part it is more incremental than LR. It is. Yep. All right. On that note, thank you for being here. Thanks for
stay with us actually for some JY.
Yes.
Action.
That's a good point. Yes. On that note, we will close this chapter and prepare for the next. So yeah, JY and I will have a little discussion right now. Thanks, Henry. Talk to you soon.
My pleasure.
All right. Welcome back. Joined again by JY.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Welcome. Yeah. Today we're going to talk about just some common pitfalls that we see students falling into, some traps along their LSAT studies. Does anything come to mind? I can offer some, but is there anything when I sort of say that is top of mind?
Yeah, common pitfalls. In no specific orders, just the first thing that came to mind is assuming you already know how long this is going to take. And I think the explanation of why a lot of people think that, I can register, like I want to go to law school, I'm going to apply next year, therefore I need to register for like, say, the November test, right? Yeah, that makes sense. But the LSAT is like the biggest component in your application. So I think, if you're really serious about law school, you should start studying for the test.
Yeah.
To see how much progress you can make. And don't I don't think it's beneficial to have all that time pressure, self-imposed time pressure to hit a certain score by a certain point, because it may or may not happen. I mean, I hope it does, right? I hope, things work out according to your plan. But I've just seen too many cases where, like myself included, where it doesn't happen like that. I also understand that like, it's not like a particularly fun test to study for. So people like kind of want to get this done as soon as possible. And I get that. But it's too important. This is like really, really important.
Yeah.
So I would recommend just, setting that aside and just take a diagnostic section, see where you are, see what the diagnostic reveals about your weaknesses, shore up on the weaknesses, take more prep tests, review those prep tests. That's where, this kind of segues into another pitfall is taking prep tests is just a way to figure out, is taking temperatures to figure out where you are right now on your journey to your goal score. The act of taking a prep test that, 2.5, 3 hours, whatever, that you set aside, that's not the time where improvement comes. Improvement comes after you take a prep test. What do you do after you take a prep test? That determines whether you make any gains, right? And now I'm talking about like blind reviewing, doing your wrong answer journal, getting together in a study group and debating, group blind review, right? Doing that together. All of that effort is where the improvement comes. So that's I mean, I guess that's two pitfalls. One is sort of setting realistic expectations about how long this is going to take, and it's variable. The other is making sure you're actually reviewing the prep tests that you take. Otherwise, you are just burning these prep tests, and they're a scarce resource. LSAT recently, I guess not that recent anymore, but whatever. Not that long ago, they revamped the prep test. They now it's like either 2 LR, 2 RC, or 3 LR, 1 RC. As a result of that, there's just fewer prep tests now. There used to be like 90 plus. Now there's like 50 something prep tests.
It's a big change.
Yeah, it's a big change. It's all of a sudden you have to way fewer prep tests. So you got to be very mindful of your resources.
Yeah. I mean, I think on the macro timeline thing, a lot of times, I mean, it's the irony is a lot. I see it most in like younger students with the time pressure. Oh, I gotta get it now. Like it's when you have older non-traditional students, like they're less worried about it. It's like they're older. Like, I mean, there's a lesson there probably because the sort of the younger students who just graduated college are like, I can't take another year off. And then you have like the 35-year-olds who's like, what's the difference? Doing it now or in a year. But the thing I try to tell whoever it is, no matter what age or is just like, hey, when you are, 5 years into your legal career or 2 years into whatever it is, like you are not going to be thinking about, I wish I'd taken this test a few months sooner, or even a year sooner, even wanting to start.
That's right.
Taking a cycle off is fine in the grand scheme of things. Now, that's not to say there aren't like real world things that sometimes, dictate that people do things at a certain timeline. But if you do have to make that decision, like make an informed one, at least know that you are sacrificing score for time and like whatever, you make the decision. But like just know what a higher score can lead to in terms of acceptance, in terms of scholarships, and in terms of like career outcomes. And then like make the decision, because we don't live in a perfect world. Like you can make your own decisions, but just be informed about it is what I usually end up telling people.
That's a really good point. I mean, there are a lot of like very good reasons to want to hurry up and go to law school. But if the reason for wanting to hurry up, go to law school is just that,
right?
Because I want to hurry up and go to law school, that you might want to take a second look at.
Right. And that is more often than not the reason. So there are many good reasons, and but oftentimes it's just I want to be done with this. Which listen,
exactly.
I get it. And I guess on the review thing, I remember like I think there were times where I took literally 2 PTs in a row, like the same day, because I was just like, for me it almost felt like. It felt like gamified. It felt like I was playing like a slot machine or something where I was like, I see a number I don't like. And it's like, well, I just got to spin it again, see what happens,
That's right.
And like, think about that mentality. Like that's so counter to what you want. Like it is not for your immediate gratification, the score you get on a PT, it's showing you something. You have to do something with that information. You don't just go into another to like get a dopamine rush. It's also a pretty slow dopamine rush. It's going to take you another 3 hours.
Very expensive dopamine rush.
Exactly. But like that was like a hard lesson to learn, and it's something that I see. That I think I did myself a disservice. I took too many PTs.
I would just say, like, as a rule of thumb, no more than 1 PT every like 1 to 2 weeks. 1 PT every like 1 to 2 weeks that's about the right rate for like 95% of students.
I mean, I used to say like, because I used to say 1 PT a week, but I know there are some people for whom like I literally cannot convince them to do that. So I'd say like max 2. Like I had some students where it's just like, no, I just don't, they're just not going to do it. So I'm like, all right, harm reduction, let's just do 2, you know? But like,
I mean, I would just say like for students, you have to decide this for yourself, right? Like for some people, sure, 2 PTs a week, that's fine. Like the point, like it's about why, like why are we saying 1 PT a week, 1 PT every 2 weeks? The why is all the work that goes in between your PTs. Once you're done with the PT, you got a blind review. Blind review takes a long time. When you blind review your wrong answer journaling, that takes a long time. Then you're checking hopefully you're checking the analytics, you're checking you're checking whatever resources you're using, explanation videos, text explanations. You're trying to change something up here in your head. Right? That's what matters. You have to change how you're thinking. Right. If you don't do that, then what do you think the next PT is going to do? It's just you're going to get the same results. Right. And that's what's slow. Like changing the way you think about stuff. That's what takes time. Right. Yeah.
Well, and there is variability in these scores, right? Like you're not going to get the same score that, you know, this, and that's the only reason why you would take it again. But think about that. Like I haven't learned anything in between test 1 and test 2 on the same day. And chances are I haven't learned much between test 1 on Monday and test 2 on Wednesday, you know? So what's the point? Exactly. It's also just like, I wouldn't really advocate for, like, I used to say like, okay, like if you have to do 2 in a week, now it's just like, there's just fewer of them. It's just, there's less to play with, you know?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, to your point about variability, there is variability in your performance in literally anything. Like if you play sports, right? You're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. Right. That's called, I mean, you have an average and then you have your variance. Right. What you're doing when you're studying is you're trying to push your average up and you're trying to tighten up that variance. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, if you just take a prep test and then 3 days later you take another prep test and let's say you get like, I don't know, 3 to 4 points higher. Right. What does that mean? I would say if you hadn't done any studying, I would say you just perform better on the second test. Does that mean that's guaranteed? Are you going to get a high performance day on actual test day? I wouldn't bank on that. In fact, if anything, I would play the risk averse position of banking on me getting a less than average performance on test day. I'm trying to hedge against that risk, right? So I need my worst performance to be acceptable to me. Yeah. Which is why you have to, right? So it's, anyway. Yeah. You have to understand why you're doing it. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, if you're taking it right after, like, it is just for your emotion. It's just for your, that's right. To improve your emotional state. It's really not, because you were capable of getting that score. I mean, there's a reason why there's like a score band, like LSAC predicts that like, if you get this score, like it really means you could get anywhere between these scores, you know? But so, it is really just about sort of like kind of trying to prove something to yourself if you do it again, and it's artificial. It's not really a sign of growth. What sort of activity would this be if I could do it one in the morning and the second one in the afternoon and actually experience significant growth? Like it would be very different, you know? I guess just speaking of kind of like review in general, that's something like I see, like one, obviously like taking PTs too quickly, but then what goes hand in hand with that is just people wanting to, whether it's on PTs or on drills, just really skip over or move quickly through the review portion, the blind review, and then the wrong answer journaling. I don't know if I'm sure that's something you've seen. Yeah. I mean, look, if you're having a hard time engaging with the material in the review phase, I think you gotta that's the problem you have to solve first, like before the problem of like, why did I get this wrong? You have to solve this higher order problem of like, I need to figure out how to trick myself to engage with this activity that I deeply dislike. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think one easy way to do it is to apply social pressure. You join a study group, right? You just jump in and then you can do blind review together. You can take a drill together and then blind review the drill together as a group. Yeah. That way, like what you're telling yourself, like, you know, I I have phone anxiety. Thank God I wouldn't have to like call people anymore. But I used to hate picking up the phone and just dialing numbers and just like having to. Yeah. So I would like one trick that I would like, you know, unfortunately, sometimes you have to call people. Yeah. I would just tell myself my task is not to call somebody. My task is to take my phone out of my pocket and punch those numbers. And then we'll just see what happens. I'm going to hit dial and like just see what happens. And then invariably, you know, somebody picks and you're just talking, it's fine. So like what I'm saying is like, you can just tell yourself like, you hate studying, fine. But just like sign up for a study group and then just show up. Like your to do, your actionable, just, I'm just going to show up at this time in this Zoom room and just like, and then we'll just see what happens, you know? I mean, surprise, what's going to happen is you're going to end up studying. So, and that's great. That's a great way to trick yourself into doing this. So I think that's the first order problem you have to solve is like, how do you solve the problem of engagement, right? I mean, we see this a lot. There's a lot of attrition with study scheduling and like, you know, people plan like, oh, I'm going to study 10 hours and then they don't. You study like an hour, you study 2 hours. I understand it's like these aspirational things that happens to me too. But one of my favorite things to do is to rewrite my to-do list. You know, like feels like I've accomplished something. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, I have the same thing with my phone. Actually, I have the same trick of just like, I haven't thought about it in those terms, but it's just like, I think about just hitting dial and then going from there, you know, cause it's like, it's like jumping off of a like, it's just, it's done. You're there.
Yeah. It's done. I think that's right. Yeah.
With what are you going to do? Just, you know, you're going to start talking. It's there's something that I run into with this test is people thinking that they should sort of do things the right, like that they don't, that something feels like it's cheating almost, that they need to develop the innate like desire to do something. And it's like, no, it doesn't matter. You can never want to do this and it's still okay. You know, you can impose these like these things designed to get you to do something and still hate every step of the way. As long as you're doing it, it's fine. Like you don't need to want something. It's as long as you're doing it. You don't need to want to eat vegetables as long as you're eating the vegetables, you know?
But you eat vegetables enough, eventually you start enjoying eating vegetables.
Yeah, you do.
Exactly. I've never seen a study group where people like, I mean, okay, never is too strong, but like the overwhelming majority of time, you know, it's like people really enjoy study groups. And it takes something that's like grueling and difficult and challenging. I mean, it's still difficult, but at least it makes it fun. You know, it makes it engaging and dynamic. And it's just, you're just like, you're talking to people, you're kind of debating, right? You're staking out your position. No, I know B is right. Right. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to defend it. Right. It's more fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, those are some good, I think those things are fairly, each of those are, well, let's see, what was it? Like timeline, going through too many PTs and skipping over a review. I mean, I feel like those are about as close to universal as like LSAT pitfalls come. I know, speaking personally, I think I struggled with every single one of those. So they,
same.
Yeah. I feel like there's
and burning through prep tests too quickly. That I mean, I had to realize at some point, like, I got to slow down. I don't have that many prep tests left.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. Thanks, JY. Appreciate you
Alex.
coming on. All right.
Of course.
Bye.
Bye.